And here again, most of us would probably simply just trade rooks. Black keeps the advantage here, but instead Shak played this very nice idea again, rook to e3. Hey there, today we're going to analyze a very nice attacking game featuring a double rook sacrifice on one square. So playing as white we have Belgian Grandmaster Daniel Darda, and playing as black we have the top Grandmaster Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, also known as Shak, a great player from Azerbaijan. If you have never seen his games, I recommend that you study his games because he's a very creative player. And this game was played at the last European Club Cup in Albania. So here Darda started with d4, and after knight to f6 and c4, here Shak played the move g6, planning to fianchetto the bishop, and here white already played a somewhat strange move, but this move is becoming quite popular lately, which is the move h4. Which might not make a lot of sense. One of the ideas is to go h5, but more importantly to avoid the main lines that come after knight to c3 here, where white plans to go e4. Here black has two main options, either to allow white to play e4 by going bishop to g7, or to play d5, going for a Grunfeld defense. And h4 also has a subtle idea. Besides going h5, here there's the idea that if black goes d5 straight away, after pawn takes and knight takes, in this position white can go for e4, and black doesn't have this option of trading the knight on c3. So if white had played knight to c3 instead of h4, here black normally trades on c3 and we get main lines in the Grunfeld defense, but in this position black has to waste more time by moving the knight, and white is getting very good control of the center. So here black went for bishop to g7, very logical follow-up after playing g6. Here h5 is not dangerous, black can simply capture with the knight. That's why here white played knight to c3, and in this position black has many options. Playing d6 or castling short is definitely possible, but black can try to counterattack on the center, which is a normal reaction when your opponent plays on one side of the board. Trying to counterattack on the center is a very logical follow-up. In this position playing d5 is actually quite interesting, because after white trades, if white plays e4, now black has the option of taking on c3. Another common idea to counterattack on the center is to go c5, and in this position white normally follows up with d5. Taking on c5 here is not very strong for white because white is giving away the center, and black can recover this pawn very easily by going knight to a6 or queen to a5. And the move that Shak played is another very interesting move, which is knight to c6. This knight is in the center. Black might have ideas to go d5 or d6 and e5 at any given moment. And here white continued with the move knight to f3. Going d5 here, even though it might look tempting because it attacks the knight. Here after knight to e5, this knight is going to be very well on e5. First of all, it is attacking the pawn on c4. So if white plays something like e4 defending the pawn, now black can follow up with a move like d6. And if white ever plays the move f4, now we see a drawback of the move h4. Now this square has become weakened, so this knight can land on g4 and it is going to be quite stable there. So in this position black is already having a better position. So after knight to c6, white continued with the move knight to f3, very logical developing move. Here black castled, and now white played d5. If white doesn't play d5, black might think about playing d5 himself. Now knight to e5 is not possible, so the knight goes to b4, and here white played g3, and now Shak started counterattacking by going e6, and after a3 and knight to a6, even though this knight is on the edge of the board, it will come back to the game very quickly. For example, after knight to c5, and playing b4 in these positions is actually quite dangerous because we see how there's some pressure against the rook on a1. So that's why white correctly continued developing. Another drawback of playing so many moves with pawns is that now white needs to catch up in development. That's why bishop to g2 makes sense. And here after pawn takes and pawn takes, rook to e8, that's another idea of playing e6 and taking on d5. Now this rook is going to be quite active on this semi-open file. And after white castled, knight to c5, now we see how this knight is getting back in the game. It might come to e4. And here white played an interesting move, d6. Otherwise, black will play d6 and develop the bishop on c8 and be quite fine. So white is trying to fight for an advantage by going d6. And in this position, first of all, if black takes on d6, this is actually quite ugly because we see how black's pawns are weakened. The d5 square is also quite attractive for white. That's why Shak played the move c6. So we get a very complicated position where this pawn on one hand is restricting black's pieces, but on the other hand, black might try to attack it. So here after knight to d2, preventing knight to e4 ideas, Shak played a5, and in this position white played the move b3, which was probably not the best idea. Knight to b3 was an interesting option, because after b3 and rook to e6, now black is getting good counterplay against this pawn, and there's also this idea of a discover attack against the rook on a1. That's why here white decided to give the pawn on d6 and went queen to c2, but the point is that after knight to c4, defending the pawn, knight f to e4, black is getting a lot of counterplay. For example, after knight takes and knight takes, there's pressure on this pawn and also some ideas to attack the rook on a1, so black is doing perfectly fine here. So here Darda decided to catch up with development and play queen to c2, and after rook takes and knight to c4, attacking the rook, rook to e6, bishop to e3, attacks the knight on c5, Shak played bishop to f8, and in this position white should have tried to gain some initiative, for example by going b4, rook a to d1, otherwise white is not going to get compensation for the pawn. And here white played the move bishop to h3, which doesn't achieve a lot, because after rook to e8, now black is planning to go d5 and just consolidate. So here the game continued b4, and now we see Shak playing his best chess, counter-attacking at any possible moment. Instead of moving the knight, now he played d5, attacking the knight and the bishop on h3, and after bishop takes and queen takes, here white captured on c5. It seems that black is hanging a lot of material. For example, after knight to b6, we see how all of black pieces are going to be under attack, but here black can simply play a similar idea to the one that was played in the game. Queen to h3 and knight to g4 is just crushing. So here white captured on c5, and in this position most of us would simply capture on c5, and after something like pawn takes and pawn takes, black is a healthy pawn up, so this is just a position that black would be very happy to play. But this is not something that Shak would play here. He went for this very nice idea of queen to h3. The idea is to go knight to g4 and then queen to h2 and give a checkmate, but as we'll see, he had to see a lot more than that, because here after knight to d2, bishop takes and pawn takes, knight to g4 just plans to give a checkmate, but white has knight to f3. So in this position black only has one pawn for the piece, and black has to do something, otherwise white will consolidate. But Shak's idea was to follow up with this very nice rook to e3, sacrificing the rook on e3, and the main idea is to capture the knight and then give a checkmate. And if white captures, then here black might capture on e3 straight away, or after taking on g2, driving the king to the edge of the board, and after knight takes, we see the main idea, which is that we are attacking the queen and also planning to go queen to g2. So at the very least, white will lose the queen here, because if the queen on c2 moves, queen to g2 will be a checkmate. But here Darda tried a very interesting idea, which is rook f to e1. Because now taking on f3 is actually not that strong, because after pawn takes and queen to h2, king to f1, the king is ready to escape via e2. So queen to h1 would not be a checkmate. But instead here Shak played the cold-blooded rook a to e1, just bringing the last piece to the party. And now again having this idea of taking on f3. So if white plays any move like queen to d2, now the idea is that after rook takes and pawn takes, queen to h2, king to f1, the king cannot escape. That's why queen to h1 is a very nice checkmate. So that's why here white tried queen to d3 with the idea to recapture with the queen. If rook takes, capture with the queen on f3. But now black can simply capture the queen, and after pawn takes, here black is materially doing fine. And here again most of us would probably simply just trade rooks. Black keeps the advantage here, but instead Shak played this very nice idea again, rook to e3, probably even more beautiful than before, because here white has two ways to capture on e3, and in this position white resigned. Let's see why. First of all, if pawn takes, queen takes will lead to a checkmate. If king to f1, queen to f2 is a checkmate, or after king to h1, knight to f2, we get a checkmate. Or if white takes with the rook, so here again the same idea. White wants to take this knight on f3 and then play queen to h2. So after rook takes, knight takes, now there's ideas to go queen to g2, giving a checkmate. And if pawn takes, now white gets the material back with interest. Queen takes, gives a check, and after the king moves either to h1 or f1, queen takes, picks up more material, the king can move anywhere, but after queen takes, now black has a lot more material, and more importantly, black keeps attacking white, so this position is just desperate for white. So I really like this game because Shak went for the nicest moves. Even though he didn't have to go for that, he could have kept the advantage by playing safe moves. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you want to get better at chess, I have a free training plan that you might want to check in the description. That's it for now. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.